Peggy 12.
Wyatt.
Why do you think the laundromat makes a perfect arcade setting?
We don't.
There was this element of arcade cabinets being in other businesses, but I don't think many of them ever decided, you know what, let's just go for the cabinets, let's abandon what we were doing to begin with.
This magic I can tell is from a different parallel.
I was 14 when the game is set. So, you know, a young teenager, pretty much obsessed with video games and skateboarding and music at the time. There's definitely a bit of me imprinted on the game for sure. The first arcade I ever went to, my brother took me to, and it was in the back of this old video shop. In the UK, I think arcades were very different to the US. I mean, they had the really nice, cool, big arcades. We probably had the Trocadero, and that's about it.
Arcade machines would pop up in the strangest places. I mean, I think the first place I ever encountered one was a Pac-Man machine at the swimming baths.
We went to our local takeaway, and it had a multi-cab just sat next to where you'd be waiting to collect your food.
For a lot of us in the UK, the arcades were, you know, the chip shop or the laundrette.
One single arcade cabinet in just because it was bought on a whim to entertain customers while they're waiting.
For the game, it works really well, having this laundrette stuff where you're actually doing these laundrette activities that in theory are mundane, but actually are really quite good fun in their own right.
Brush my teeth after my cornflakes. Call to my homeless place.
So Arcade Paradise is set in the fictional town of Grindstone.
A dead-end town in generic America in 1993.
You're listening to 802 The Grindstone, the sharpest station this side of the Mississippi.
The 90s as an era is probably a good time for the game to be set because it gives us a really big canvas of the types of games that we can make, the types of games that we can put in there.
You've got a great mix of the older stuff, like, you know, the Pac-Man era games, through to games like Gauntlet that had more advanced graphics and sound.
We could have a bit more freedom in terms of how good the graphics of the games can be.
We wanted to do some 3D games, like Racer Chaser, for example, is our kind of top-down GTA meets Pac-Man game. A little bit of artistic license into the kind of late 90s, kind of PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn sort of era.
It gave us that extra bit of wiggle room in order to like make the arcade games feel as good as we could make them.
To be able to do kind of slightly more modern takes on things, as well as go right back to the kind of late 70s, early 80s in terms of the visuals and stuff.
With Arcade Paradise, we've had the chance to put all of that range in. No matter what your particular nostalgia is for an arcade game, there'll be something there.
We're not trying to stick to a totally realistic portrayal of the 90s. It's not a historical document.
For many of the people who are gamers and were gamers on that generation, it would be nostalgic.
We do try and kind of tweak those little sort of nostalgia bubbles. The pause menu, for example, is a PDA, which a lot of younger players might mistake as a mobile phone because it does essentially the same sort of stuff. We've got stuff like a Windows 95-esque desktop on a 386 PC, and when you go to buy your arcade machines or some of the player upgrades, you know, you're buying them from a kind of really, really shoddy looking browser with like terrible background things. So yeah, the 90s tech is all in there. If I could go back to the 90s to play any arcade machine.
Daytona USA or Sega Rally, that sort of Sega racing games, they were my real jam.
Probably play all the ones that I already play, because I mean, we're here in this awesome arcade and the very first thing I looked for was Windjammers.
Bubble Bobble, insanely catchy theme tune, which you can hear always from the other side of the arcade, so that's an easy one to find.
All the Neo Geo games are absolute stone cold classics.
I would go straight to Street Fighter. When we played it, I tried to combo something, and I think we broke it or something, maybe. So after that, the guy was angry and we just ran.
The games that are still around now are the ones that, you know, were popular back then for a really good reason, because they're excellent games. I suppose I have rose-tinted glasses about the 90s and kind of, you know, being a teenager during that time.
The 90s were the peak of when arcades were seen like as being the cool thing to go to.
And I know it's kind of the end of the arcade era, but let's just give it a nice big sort of send-off, as it were. You're you're sort of running this arcade and you shouldn't really be.
You are Ashley, who has been stuck in this dead-end job by your dad, Gerald.
You are given this laundrette by your father to take responsibility and make, something out of yourself.